Hey guys, tonight we begin with something quietly fascinating. The kind of story that doesn't shout or rush, but slowly unfolds like a long exhale after a busy day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And maybe let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to imagine little lights glowing across the map, people in quiet bedrooms, earbuds in, drifting together through time and history. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Lay back, close your eyes, and let's ease into tonight's story slowly. Because tonight, we're not talking about wars or politics, not loud rivalries or breaking news. We're going to talk about something much quieter. The untold economic dance between two nations, China and the United States. It's not really a battle in the way you might imagine. It's more like an ancient game of Go played with patience and calm intention. Two civilizations walking different paths that over time curve toward each other until their destinies quietly intertwined. Now, imagine the Earth seen from space. One side glowing with the soft gold of American cities, the other illuminated by the gentle clusters of light across China. Two different rhythms pulsing across the same planet. Factories and offices, ports and farmlands, each beating in quiet coordination, even when they seem to be competing. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. A hum that stretches across oceans, the sound of global trade, of ships gliding through night harbors, of invisible digital signals traveling beneath the sea. For most of us, it's easy to forget how deeply connected our lives are. The phone beside your pillow, the blanket you're wrapped in, the soft light on your nightstand. Each might carry a story that stretches across the Pacific Ocean. A design drawn in California. Materials gathered in Southeast Asia. Assembled in a quiet industrial town in southern China. Shipped through vast ports, guided by invisible data, and finally arriving at your doorstep. Becoming part of your life without you ever noticing. That quiet chain of events is the heartbeat of this story. It isn't about conflict or drama. It's about balance. Two nations learning to live within the same rhythm of trade, innovation, and need. And tonight, as you rest, we'll travel through that story together. We'll trace the paths of silk and silver, of cargo ships and algorithms, of ideas that started as whispers and became the structure of our modern world. You don't need to remember every detail. Just listen. Let the words drift like a slow tide. You can close your eyes and let the world of numbers, trade routes, and quiet ambitions fade into the rhythm of your breathing. Because this isn't really a story about competition. It's a story about connection. About how two great powers, separated by oceans and centuries, learn to depend on one another in ways neither could have predicted. So, as the night deepens outside your window, let's begin our journey. We'll start at the roots, long before skyscrapers, satellites, or stock markets. In a time when both nations were still dreaming of what they might become. Chapter 1. The Two Giants Awaken. Before we begin, take a slow, deep breath. Inhale through your nose and exhale softly through your mouth. Let your shoulders sink into your pillow and let your thoughts settle like dust in golden evening light. Now, imagine time slowing down. The world grows quieter, and we step backward through the centuries to a time when both of the great powers we know today were still dreaming of what they would become. Far to the east, the land that would one day be known as China was already ancient. Its rivers, the Yangtze and the Yellow, moved through the valleys like long, slow threads of silver, weaving together villages, farms, and temples. It was a world of tea and silk, of bronze bells and handwritten poetry. The air carried the scent of incense and soil, and markets hummed with calm conversation instead of noise. In the soft light of dawn, farmers worked the rice terraces, their movements rhythmic and patient, the same motions repeated across thousands of years. In great halls, scholars studied calligraphy and philosophy, trying to understand balance, harmony, and the natural rhythm of the world. Even then, China's economy wasn't about speed or expansion. It was about endurance, patience, and the quiet flow of trade along the Silk Road. Those roads connected east and west long before anyone had heard of America. Caravans moved like slow rivers of fabric, spice, and dreams, carrying silk to the Mediterranean and gold and silver back toward the east. Each exchange carried more than goods. It carried ideas, designs, and ways of thinking. The world was already learning from China, and China was quietly learning from the world. Now shift your mind to the other side of the planet. Across a vast and silent ocean, the Americas were still untouched by the machines and markets that would someday define them. There were forests stretching endlessly, rivers as wide as cities, and skies unbroken by smoke or ships. It would be many centuries before a new nation rose here, a nation built not on ancient dynasties, but on bold experiments and restless energy. When the United States finally emerged in the late 18th century, it was young, ambitious, and full of motion. While China measured time in dynasties, America measured it in decades, in inventions, and in dreams. Factories appeared almost overnight. Trains and telegraphs stitched the land together like threads of lightning. And in that restless rhythm, the young nation began to grow. Yet both lands shared something subtle, something easy to miss. Each had a deep belief in work, not just labor, but purpose. China found its rhythm in harmony and repetition. America found its rhythm in progress and invention. Two ways of seeing the world, both powerful in their own quiet way. In those early days, the two nations knew little of each other, but the winds of trade had already started to move. Ships from American ports began to cross the Pacific, carrying silver, furs, and dreams of discovery, returning with porcelain, silk, and tea, the luxuries that whispered of distant worlds. In the 1780s, a single American ship, the Empress of China, made that journey. It was quiet compared to the caravans of the Silk Road, but symbolically, it was the start of something vast. The first economic thread between two very different worlds. As centuries turned, those threads multiplied, weaving into something greater. Factories in one land, raw materials in another. Ideas flowing in both directions, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in storms. It would take time before either nation realized how deeply their futures would become entwined. But for now, in this first chapter of their story, both were simply awakening. China, with its ancient calm, rediscovering its place in a changing world. America, young and energetic, learning how to transform ambition into influence. Two distant worlds slowly turning toward one another, not through a battle, but through the quiet logic of trade and time. And as night settles around you, you can almost picture them both under the same moon. On one side of the planet, farmers tending to rice fields. On the other, inventors sketching designs by candlelight. Both unaware that, centuries later, their stories would blend into one. So for now, let your mind rest on that image. The slow awakening of two civilizations, each with its own rhythm, each carrying a dream that would one day meet halfway across the ocean. Breathe in again, slowly. Let it out softly. And feel the quiet weight of history settle like a blanket, because our journey has only just begun. Chapter 2, The Quiet Shift of Power. Take another slow, steady breath. Feel the calm air move through your chest, the rhythm of your heart slowing, matching the pace of our story. The world outside fades into quiet, and the only thing that remains is this gentle voice, guiding you deeper into a world of history, connection, and time. When we last left our story, both nations were awakening. China, an ancient civilization rediscovering its rhythm, and America, a young country stretching into its future. Now, the centuries begin to move forward, and with them comes the quiet, unseen shift of power. In the 1800s, the world began to shrink. Steamships crossed oceans that once seemed endless. Telegraph lines whispered across continents. And in that growing network, new patterns began to emerge. For thousands of years, China had been the heart of trade, the place where silk, porcelain, and tea shaped global desires. But as industrialization spread across Europe and America, the world's balance began to change. Machines replaced hands, factories replaced workshops, and the rhythm of production quickened like a heartbeat, learning to run. In quiet villages across China, old crafts continued, steady and unhurried. But in American cities like Boston, Chicago, and New York, chimneys rose into the sky. Trains screamed across plains, bringing goods, people, and dreams from coast to coast. The energy of invention filled the air like electricity. Still, this was not a sudden competition. It was more like the changing of seasons, one world cooling while another gently warmed. For a time, China closed its doors to protect its traditions, while America opened its arms to the future, welcoming inventors, immigrants, and endless ambition. And yet, even as they drifted apart, their stories were still quietly connected. Tea continued to arrive at American docks. Porcelain and silk filled elegant homes, and across the Pacific, American silver and cotton found their way into Chinese markets. The world was slowly weaving a global fabric, and though the threads were delicate, they were strong. Then came a time of quiet imbalance. Colonial powers pressed upon China, seeking ports and privileges, while America, still defining its identity, looked on from afar. The age of trade became the age of industry, and the rhythm of the world changed once more. Factories filled the days with clanging metal, and the nights with soft lamplight and exhaustion. The human spirit was adjusting to the age of machines, and within that transformation, the seeds of modern power were planted. While China faced internal change and foreign pressure, America discovered a kind of endless motion: railroads, assembly lines, oil wells, and steel bridges. It was a time of confidence, of belief that anything could be built. And with that belief came the birth of a new kind of power, economic power. But even the shift was not loud or cruel. It was gradual, patient, and carried on the backs of ordinary people. Farmers, factory workers, traders, and sailors, each doing their part in quiet repetition, moving the gears of history forward, one careful turn at a time. By the early 20th century, the two nations stood on opposite sides of the Pacific like reflections of different eras. One looked toward the past for balance and wisdom. The other looked toward the future for progress and speed. And between them stretched an ocean, wide, silent, and full of possibility. Ships continued to cross that ocean, carrying not just goods, but glimpses of what was to come. American businessmen brought ideas of industry and capitalism. Chinese thinkers studied reform and modern education. Knowledge flowed both ways, like tides under the moon. And so the world began to change again, not with explosions or conflict, but through slow understanding, trade, and transformation. This quiet shift of power was not a single moment in time. It was a century-long hum, the sound of factories awakening on one shore and traditions adapting on the other. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the rhythmic tapping of typewriters, the whistle of distant trains, and the rustle of paper money being counted under dim yellow light. It was the sound of a new age arriving. And somewhere, deep beneath that noise, the connection between China and the United States continued to strengthen, invisible but unbreakable. The stage was quietly being set for the modern world we know today. As you listen, let that image settle gently in your mind. Two nations, each following its own rhythm, unaware that one day they would dance to the same global tune. Let that thought drift through your mind as your body sinks deeper into rest. History, like sleep, happens in cycles, waves that rise and fall, carrying us from one era to the next. And just as night follows day, every shift of power is followed by calm. Every ending makes room for a new beginning. Now breathe in again, slowly. Exhale softly, and imagine the ocean that separates these two lands, still and silver under the moon, whispering softly to itself as the world turns. Chapter 3. Factories and Dreams. Before we begin, take another long, slow breath. In and out. Feel your body sink a little deeper into comfort. Maybe your pillow feels softer now, your thoughts quieter. Let's step softly into the next part of our story. By the middle of the 20th century, the world was rebuilding itself after great wars and long hardship. Skylines began to rise again, ports reopened, and ships once more carried goods across the oceans. America stood tall, confident, booming, full of energy and invention. Factories thrummed day and night, and a new way of life was taking shape, one filled with televisions, cars, supermarkets, and suburban dreams. People believed in progress. They believed in the power of work, the dignity of production, and the promise of comfort. The rhythm of American life was steady, confident, and full of motion. But far away, on the other side of the Pacific, something quieter was beginning. China, still finding its way after long decades of change and struggle, was beginning to dream of industry too, though in its own slow and deliberate rhythm. The roads were dusty, the cities were still finding their shape, but the hum of small factories had started to appear in the distance. It was as if the faint echo of one nation's heartbeat was reaching across the ocean, awakening another. In the 1970s and 80s, the world began to change again, not through conflict, but through trade. Leaders from both sides began to speak, to meet, to imagine a shared world of commerce. Factories that once served only local towns now began to make products for faraway lands. And the Pacific Ocean, once a vast and silent divide, became a bridge. America had dreams of abundance, of endless supply and growing demand. China had dreams of building, of creating, producing, and rising through work. Together, those dreams began to intertwine, like threads of silk woven across continents, quietly binding two nations into one economic rhythm. It started small. Toys, clothes, small electronics. Simple things that filled shelves in quiet suburban stores across America. They carried little made in China labels that most people didn't notice. But behind each label, there were hands, thousands, then millions of hands, working patiently, building, shaping, sending a piece of their effort halfway across the world. And in return, money, technology, and ideas began to flow back across the ocean. A cycle was forming, quiet, powerful, and seemingly endless. If you close your eyes now, imagine a calm night in the late 1980s. In a small coastal Chinese city, the air smells faintly of salt and metal. Inside a softly lit workshop, rows of workers move slowly, rhythmically, the whir of sewing machines, the hum of assembly lines. Outside, the ocean reflects the lights of ships waiting to carry containers to faraway American ports. On the other side of the ocean, in a quiet home in California or Ohio, someone unwraps a new lamp or radio, unaware that it came from a dream half a world away. This was how the balance began to shift again, not through war, not through loud confrontation, but through quiet cooperation. Factories grew, trade deepened, and economies became woven together, as if two instruments began playing the same song, each in its own tone, yet perfectly in harmony. America began to specialize in design, marketing, and finance, the ideas and symbols of wealth. China specialized in production, the hands that turned those ideas into something real. Together, they built a system that fed both nations, consumption on one side, creation on the other. It was a strange kind of partnership, one built not on trust or emotion, but on necessity and rhythm. By the 1990s, the rhythm had grown louder. Container ships grew massive, ports expanded, and global trade became the pulse of modern life. But still, beneath the noise, the story was simple. A dream shared by millions, the dream of a better life, built through work, patience, and quiet hope. If you were to walk through a port city in those years, maybe Shanghai, maybe Los Angeles, you'd hear the same sounds. The clang of cranes, the creak of ropes, the hum of engines loading cargo through the night. The language was different, but the feeling was the same: purpose, movement, progress. And yet, even as trade bound the two countries closer together, it also created a gentle tension, one that no one quite understood at the time. America began to depend on China for cheap goods. China began to depend on America for demand. Each became a mirror to the other, reflecting strength, need, and ambition. But in those early days, it didn't feel like a battle. It felt like a balance, a kind of global harmony that made sense, even if no one could see its full shape. It was peaceful. It was ordinary. And like all things in history, it was quietly leading to the next turn of the story. So as you breathe now, think of that time, a world connected not by power or politics, but by everyday life, by the simple act of making, buying, shipping, and dreaming. It was a time when factories hummed like lullabies, when ocean freighters glided like drifting clouds, and when the night sky above both nations was filled with the same stars. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine those stars, glimmering softly over the Pacific, watching silently as history took another gentle step forward. Chapter 4, The Digital Tide. Before we begin, take another deep, easy breath. Let your shoulders relax and feel the weight of the day slowly melting away. We've drifted through centuries of trade, through the soft sounds of factories and oceans. Now, we step quietly into a new kind of world, one that hums not with machines, but with data, screens, and invisible signals. The late 1990s were a strange and wondrous time. Across the United States, glowing computer screens began to light up homes and offices. The soft buzz of dial-up internet filled living rooms like a mechanical lullaby. People discovered the magic of connection, of sending words, pictures, and money across the world in an instant. And though the few noticed, that gentle hum of technology was already reaching across the Pacific. In China, cities were changing again. The same factories that once made toys and radios began to produce computer chips and circuit boards. Small towns turned into bustling tech zones. Wires ran under streets, satellites blinked above the clouds, and the invisible web of global commerce grew tighter. America had built the world's first digital dream, a place where innovation, venture capital, and creativity thrived. Silicon Valley glowed like a beacon of the future. Names like Microsoft, Apple, and later, Google and Amazon, became symbols of a new kind of power, not of armies or oil, but of code, attention, and information. Meanwhile, in China, a quieter revolution was beginning. The government looked at the rising tide of technology and saw not a threat, but an opportunity. It began to open doors for new companies, nurturing local startups that would soon become giants in their own right. Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, names that would one day be spoken in the same breath as America's digital titans. But back then, it all felt peaceful. Just small ripples in the great ocean of trade. The internet connected the world, and for a while, it seemed as if distance and rivalry had faded away. People in America ordered products online, and those products quietly made their journey from a Chinese port to an American doorstep. Click by click, box by box, a new kind of economy was being born, not of steel and oil, but of information, logistics, and invisible trust. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear that digital tide, the faint hum of servers in the night, the glow of screens reflecting in tired eyes, the quiet heartbeat of a connected world. By the early 2000s, data had become the new gold. The old measures of wealth, land, factories, even oil, were being replaced by something weightless: information. And this time, the balance between China and the US wasn't just about who built more or sold more, but about who knew more. America's strength was in ideas and innovation and technology. China's strength was in scale, in production, and adaptation. Together, they created an engine that powered the 21st century. It was fast, efficient, and almost invisible. But like all tides, it carried both calm and current. The more digital the world became, the more connected. And yet, the more quietly dependent both nations grew. The chips in American computers were made in Asia. The code behind Chinese apps was inspired by Silicon Valley. The flow was circular, endless, like the moon's pull on the sea, steady, rhythmic, and impossible to stop. And through this flow, ordinary people's lives began to change. American teenagers stayed up late chatting online, while young engineers in Shenzhen stayed up late coding the next great platform. Different worlds, but somehow the same light of a monitor glowed on both their faces. Commerce, culture, and information began to mix in ways that no one fully understood. It wasn't a battle yet, just a slow drift of influence, like two rivers joining quietly in the dark. Governments started to take notice. Data became power. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, questions began to rise. Who controls the flow of information? Who sets the rules of digital trade? Who owns the attention of billions of people? For now, though, our story remains gentle, because at this point in time, the world still believed in connection, in the promise that technology would bring peace, understanding, and maybe even equality. And as the sun set on one millennium and rose on another, the digital tide kept rolling in, soft, steady, and unstoppable. If you close your eyes, imagine standing on a quiet beach at night. The air is cool. The ocean stretches before you, vast and dark, but full of shimmering light beneath the surface. Each wave that reaches the shore is another pulse of the internet, another flow of data, money, and human dreams. And across that same ocean, in two great nations, millions of people are still awake, typing, clicking, thinking, creating, all part of the same invisible rhythm that carries the world forward. Let that rhythm guide your breath for a moment. Inhale slowly, exhale softly. Imagine that digital tide, steady, endless, peaceful, flowing gently beneath the stars. Chapter 5. The Quiet Rivalry. Before we begin, take one long, deep breath. Let the air move in slowly and drift out again. The night is still. Your mind is calm. And the world of our story is waiting quietly just beyond the horizon. For years, the tide between China and the United States had flowed smoothly. Trade, technology, and ideas moving across the ocean like gentle waves. Each side had found its rhythm, each dependent on the other in quiet, practical ways. But as the new century settled in, something began to shift. Not suddenly, not with noise, but like a faint change in the wind before the rain. America looked across the Pacific and saw a partner becoming powerful. China looked back and saw an opportunity to lead. Both dreams were beautiful, but they could not exist in perfect balance forever. In the early 2010s, the world's economy had become deeply digital, filled with invisible connections, supply chains, and data streams. Smartphones had replaced newspapers. Online marketplaces replaced storefronts. And through those quiet changes, a subtle competition began to grow. It wasn't a battle of weapons or borders. It was a battle of influence, of who would shape the future, the platforms, the networks, the systems that touched every human life. America had built the early internet, its search engines, its social networks, its great technology empires. China watched carefully, learned quickly, and began to build its own. Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, TikTok, these weren't just companies. They were symbols of a nation that had caught the rhythm of the modern age. Still, the rivalry remained quiet. Trade continued, goods flowed, investments crossed the ocean as if nothing had changed. But behind closed doors, policymakers and economists began to whisper about dependency, about power, about control. And yet, for most people, life continued peacefully. An American family scrolled through social media made in California. A Chinese family watched an American movie on a streaming platform. No one thought of rivalry. Only connection. Only comfort. That's the thing about economic battles. They don't feel like battles at all. They happen in numbers, in prices, in markets that rise and fall softly, like the breathing of the world. But as both nations grew stronger, their dreams began to overlap. Both wanted security. Both wanted influence. Both wanted to guide the shape of tomorrow. China began investing in technology, energy, and innovation at breathtaking speed. Entire cities transformed in a decade. High-speed trains, glittering skyscrapers, digital payment systems, all rising quietly where old factories once stood. America, meanwhile, held its own kind of power, the power of global trust, of the dollar that still ruled the world's trade, and of institutions that shaped policy and finance. It was a strange kind of balance, one built not on friendship or enmity, but on shared momentum. And like all balances, it was delicate. In boardrooms, governments, and research labs, questions began to stir. Who would lead in artificial intelligence? Who would control the next great wave of data and innovation? Who would write the rules of the digital age? But even in that quiet tension, there was beauty, because rivalry, when peaceful, can also be creative. Each side pushed the other to grow, to invent, to adapt. Competition became the silent teacher of progress. And underneath it all, the ocean still shimmered with trade routes and cables, millions of invisible lines connecting factories, ports, and people. Even in rivalry, the world remained deeply intertwined. If you imagine the Earth from space, you'd still see those glowing golden threads flowing between Los Angeles and Shanghai, between Seattle and Shenzhen. They pulse gently, like a shared heartbeat. And maybe that's the quiet truth, that even as nations compete, the rhythm of the world remains connected. We may call it rivalry, but it is in its own way a kind of partnership, a delicate dance between independence and interdependence. As night deepens, imagine that dance continuing, two lights circling each other across the dark Pacific, never colliding, never parting completely. Their glow reflecting softly on the water, fading gently into the mist. Now, take another slow breath. Let the sound of this story settle into the background of your mind. The rivalry will continue, yes, but for tonight, it remains quiet, balanced, almost peaceful. Chapter 6. The Future in Balance. The night has grown quieter now. The world outside your window rests under a soft silver moon. And somewhere across the Pacific, the same moonlight touches two distant shores, one in China, one in the United States. Different lands, same light. That's how it has always been. Two nations standing apart, yet sharing the same sky, the same tides, the same silent rhythm of time. In the decades that followed their quiet rivalry, both countries began to see something deeper, that their strength did not lie in separation, but in connection. China's cities rose higher, Its digital systems spread wider, its people dreamed bolder. America's innovation continued to shape the tools, the networks, and the global ideas that connected us all. For all the competition and uncertainty, a quiet truth remained. Neither could move forward without the other. A chip designed in California might be built in Shenzhen. A smartphone sold in Beijing might run an app coded in Seattle. A startup idea born in Silicon Valley might find its market in Shanghai. Invisible threads wove the world together, fragile yet unbreakable. Economists called it interdependence. But perhaps it was something gentler, a kind of shared destiny. When one side stumbled, the other felt it. When one side grew, the other was inspired to do more. They were no longer simply rivals. They were reflections of each other's ambition. And slowly, people began to understand that the future wasn't a race to win, but a balance to protect. Imagine, if you can, the digital world as a vast ocean. Each nation builds its ships, its routes, its harbors. They sail in different directions, but the waves that carry them are the same. That ocean data, trade, technology, and trust belongs to no one and to everyone at once. Even as governments debate and markets shift, the quiet work of connection continues. A message sent, a package delivered, a discovery shared. Somewhere, a scientist in Beijing studies American research. Somewhere else, a student in Boston reads a book translated from Mandarin. Tiny moments of understanding, threads that hold the balance together. It is a slow balance. It changes with time, adapts with technology, and bends with politics. But it endures, because the world itself prefers harmony over conflict. And in that harmony, something peaceful takes shape. The idea that progress doesn't need to be loud, that strength can come from patience, that wisdom can grow from stillness. The quiet rivalry between China and the US is not just a story of economics. It is a story of human nature, our need to grow, to lead, to belong, and ultimately, to coexist. When we step back far enough, the lines between nations blur. All that remains is the shared heartbeat of humanity, millions of people, each dreaming, working, creating under the same calm sky. And as the night deepens, you can imagine those dreams floating gently above the world, like lanterns drifting upward, glowing softly, meeting one another in the endless dark. For every rivalry, there is a reflection. For every difference, there is dialogue. And for every tension, there is the quiet hope that tomorrow will be wiser, gentler, and more balanced than today. So let the world turn, let the waves move, let the markets rise and fall like the tide. Because somewhere between all that noise, the world continues to whisper its truth, that peace, like progress, is built one calm moment at a time. Now take one slow breath, let it in, and let it go. You've reached the end of this long story, a story not of winners or losers, but of connection, patience, and balance. And as you drift into sleep, remember this: even the greatest powers on earth are guided by the same quiet rhythm, the rhythm of time, of change, and of dreams shared under one sky. The rivalry rests, the night is calm, and the world for a moment feels perfectly still. Good night.